Good evening, buenas tardes. My name is Annabelle Dominguez, and I would like to welcome every one of you to the 2018 Board of Supervisors Candidate Forum, sponsored by True North Organizing Network. True North Organizing Network develops leadership in communities with common values across tribal lands, Del Norte, and Humboldt counties. True North supports families, elders, youth, and individuals of diverse faith, traditions, race, culture, and economic capacities, working together for powerful change. United using the power of relationship and the disciplined community organizing model, True North leaders are courageously challenging social, economic, and environmental injustice in our region. I just wanted to welcome all of you in the back. If you wanted to come forward, that way you can hear a little better, see the projector, please feel welcome to come a little closer. Also, before we get started, a little housekeeping. We have several exits directly behind you to go into the hallway. Over here to your left, down the hall, is the restrooms. This exit over here to your right is directly into the street. So we do have a lot to accomplish this evening, so let's go ahead and get started. Candidates, you will have 1.5 minutes to briefly introduce yourself before going into direct questions that we'll be asking. So let's go ahead and get started with you, Chris.
Good evening and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Been in this community for a very long time, 25 years almost. Through various careers and jobs, I've worked my way through learning about this community. Gone to many weddings, gone to a lot of funerals, seen a lot of graduations. But the most important thing is that we, as a small community, need to work together for common goals. And oftentimes, those goals are blurred, but us as community members, and more importantly as elected officials, need to try to make those lines come together so we're all working in the same direction. As an elected person here in this county, sometimes that's difficult, sometimes it's easy. We're never going to see eye to eye, but a balanced approach is always very important to getting the job done as an elected person here. I'll try to ensure that pace continues into the future if I'm elected again in 2018. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting us here to this forum so you can find out a little bit more about the candidates. My name is David Mason. Moved to the county in 2005, January, to take a job as the county's code enforcement officer. I was a little ahead of the schedule because my plan had been to retire to Del Norte County, and I got an opportunity to come up early. So I took it. I love Del Norte County. It's always been my aspiration to live here, and I'm living the dream. So I retired recently from the county. And why supervisor? Well, because there's some changes that need to be made, and the best place to make them is at the top. Some policies and goals need to be changed, fine-tuned, to iron out the bumps that we've had and get things going in the right direction. I've got some new vision, some new direction, and a whole bunch of tools in my toolbox to make that happen. I love this county, I love the people in it, and if elected, it'll be one of the hardest working supervisors you've ever seen. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Gerry Hemingsen. I'm currently the supervisor in District 4. Thank you for all coming out this evening to listen to us tell a little bit about ourselves and how we feel on certain issues. I was born here in Crescent City, the old Seaside Hospital when it was there. There was the Hampton Suites for a while. I don't know what it is now. Raised 5 children here. Currently, 4 of those children still live in Del Norte County. I have 2 grandchildren that live in Del Norte County. My kids work here. My grandchildren go to public schools here. The way things operate in this county are very important to me. trying to make this county a place where if children or grandchildren choose to return to this county to go to work, that they have the opportunity to do so. And I've done everything that I can, and I will continue to, as long as I'm in office, to make sure that the county is receptive and has an economic base that's able to sustain your children, your grandchildren, as well as mine. Thank you.
Yes, good evening. My name is Jake Smith. Thank you to True North for inviting me tonight. I'm running for District 3 Supervisor, and I want to say that I have the skills and the experience to help our county move forward. And I have lived in Del Mar County for 6 years, but I've been heavily engaged in the community. And I've learned a lot about the community, and I will learn more about the community. But I feel that my experience has been beneficial in helping me to serve you as supervisor. I'm retired Caltrans. I worked at Caltrans for 31 years. Some of my duties were public outreach, managing transit, budgeting, and I've also been an advisor to the Caltrans Directorate. So I think these skills that I have will help the county, especially when it comes to transportation projects and especially trying to get last chance grade funded. I can work towards that. I have facilitation skills. I can do public meetings and outreach, which we need in our district, and other things to work hard to get the job done. So you're going to hear more from me tonight on issues, and I welcome your questions, and thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Ron Phillips. We have owned a home here since 2002. We moved here permanently in early 2005. In 2007, I become interested in the harbor. Late 2007, I was appointed to the Harbor Commission, and my term will be up in the first of the year, after serving on there for 11 years and going through a number of tsunamis and hoping to rebuild the harbor to the quality that it is today. I want to thank all of you for coming out. I wish there had been more. Why I'm running is I think it's a time for change. I think 12 years is enough for any one individual to sit on a board. And I think you've got 3 good qualified people that are challenging Supervisor Hemingsen. So I hope all of you listen to what we have to say tonight and appreciate that we have such quality of people running for office.
Thank you for those introductions. So next we'll go ahead and start with our first question that's going to be posed by Felice Pache. His question is going to be a little bit more complicated, so we're going to give you about 2 minutes to answer. And then the rest of the 4 questions will give you about 1.5 minutes to answer. Felice?
Good evening. The topic of this question is pesticide risks on the Smith River Plain. State records confirm that more toxic pesticides are used per acre on the Smith River Plain than anywhere else in California. The labels on those pesticides state that they are not to be sprayed when the wind speed exceeds 10 miles per hour. And yet those who live in the area regularly see spray rigs operating when the wind is blowing hard. Del Norte County's Agricultural Commissioner is supposed to regulate the spraying, but he does not monitor wind speed on Smith River Plain and has not halted toxic spraying during high winds. Recent surface and groundwater quality monitoring by the North Coast Water Board found copper and pesticides in surface water on Smith River Plain at levels toxic to marine organisms. Testing also found pesticide residues in groundwater. This pollution is a direct threat to residents, workers in the Smith River estuary, including coho salmon and tidewater goby, which are two species listed under the Endangered Species Act as threatened. In spite of that, there are no-spray buffers around those streams or around homes and low-income trailer courts. Toxic spraying of lily bulbs has even taken place right next to Smith River Elementary School. Health records for Del Norte County and a survey of residents confirm that residents and agricultural workers periodically seek medical treatment for acute exposure to pesticides. There are homes on Smith River Plain which draw domestic water from private wells. In some, spraying and fumigating with toxic chemicals on the plain creates health risks for workers, students, and other residents, as well as threats to aquatic life in streams on the plain and in the Smith River estuary. Our question is about those risks. If you are elected, will you support no-spray buffers along streams to keep pesticides out of the water? And what other actions will you take or advocate in order to safeguard clean drinking water and protection from pesticides for those living and working on Smith River Plain? And this question will go first to David Mason.
Okay. I support keeping pesticides out of streams, rivers, oceans, groundwater, etc. Some spraying is necessary to prevent the spread of invasive species from hitching a ride on outgoing commercial crops. But pesticides are expensive, and when they enter streams and rivers, they aren't helping the crops at all. Excessive runoff or overspray is a waste of money and a detriment to the environment. The challenge is knowing where the line should be so that the crops are protected as well as protecting the waterways. And these types of issues, I rely heavily on the subject matter experts. As far as other actions, one of the biggest challenges in rural areas is making sure that people are getting their potable water from an approved source and not an irrigation well. The only way to know for sure is for someone to go and test the water. Check to see where their water supply is coming from. Community service districts that provide water are required by law to meet strict purity standards, and I would advocate for those CSDs to take the lead in their own jurisdictions and assistance from county environmental health as needed. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a very complex issue. Supervisor Howard and I last week went over to the Regional Water Quality Board meeting to listen to the information that was provided on the reports that came out on the testing. I'm certainly not a scientist, so for me to tell you that I will support a buffer of X number of feet or Y number of feet or whatever it is, I think there's a lot of variables here. I mean, you could be, maybe 50 feet's not enough, and maybe in some cases 50 feet is not needed. Land is not all the same. There's contours, there's slopes. There's a lot of different issues that go on with the land itself when it's next to a river. We certainly don't want to see those pesticides get into the river or into the groundwater. We need to make sure that what we're doing is working. The lily bulb growers are going to work very closely with the Regional Water Quality Board staff, and they're going to come up with best management practices. Those best management practices are going to be utilized in order to decide on if there's buffers needed, if there's more buffers, less buffers, whatever that is. Whatever they come up with, the lily bulb growers are more than willing to do. And certainly clean water is very important to all of us, and not just in the Smith River Plain, But, throughout Del Mar County, we need to make sure that our water is clean and safe. Thank you.
I've done quite a bit of research on this, and it is a very complex issue, I agree. And what I found out, of course, and what's been stated, is that every pesticide has a different legal application. So there's a different application legally for each specific pesticide. So I heard the 2018 report mentioned from the North Coast Water Quality Board, and in the executive summary, that stated that testing showed compliance with water quality objectives and acceptable limits for a healthy aquatic ecosystem. Now, I can tell you that I've read this report in its entirety, and frankly, it's a very confusing and difficult to understand report. It's hard to get a lot out of that. So you really have to go, the best source for that is the executive summary to give you the final results of what the testing were. Now, that being said, I would support doing further testing up the creeks, further than they did, because you're probably aware that there may be dump sites up Bridie Creek Road. There was mining activity up there, and some of the tests showed minerals that suggest mining or other elements in the ground. So I think they should go further up in the testing. And then finally, I think this begs out to have a series of town hall meetings. I haven't heard that brought up yet, but I think when these results come out, I think the best thing to do is take it out to the public. I've already talked to the farmers and North Coast Water Quality Board about coming for a series of town hall meetings to discuss and flesh out these issues. That, I think, is the most important thing we could do. Thank you.
Well, they've answered all this. One of the things that I found, and I heard some of it a while ago, was a report that was done in 1990. The changes effective in 1990 was that there was a certain chemical that would never leave the groundwater. This was changed, and so the pesticides that have been sprayed on the fields has changed also. I'm with everybody else. I don't want to see the Smith River water estuary having chemicals in it and not having safe drinking water. I wanted to know about moving, or how close we could spray to a flow. That has to be determined, and as a supervisor, I would work to stay abreast of the environmental conditions surrounding the Smith River estuary. Also work hand in hand with the lily farmers, other farmers, and monitoring agencies like the State Water Resource Control Board. I will make sure there is a fair and equitable solution to any challenges that need to be made to protect safe water.
It needs to go back to Chris.
Not trying to steal any of my time there, Gerry.
Well, I just thought maybe I should finish up the answer.
That's okay. So this is a very important topic to us here in Del Mar County. We paid a great deal of attention to it over the last 4 years, specifically as the Regional Water Quality Control Board began to release their reports. 2 years ago, we had Rebecca Fitzgerald for the North Coast Board come up and present to our community about getting the information out and making sure it was factual so everybody here in our community knows. Again, last week, as we approached the board, we invited them here to Del Mar County. Hopefully they'll be here before June to allow the report that was just commissioned to be presented, which presents data from 2013 to the present on surface water testing, both above and below areas where pesticides and herbicides are sprayed. It's extremely important to know that Department of Pesticides Controls regulates those pesticides and how they're applied, when they're applied. But even though that control is placed there, maybe a farmer doesn't always see what's going on, maybe he does. But what we do know is that there's a regulatory process in place. How that can be improved is going to be extremely important. And what we do know now is that our lily bulb growers here in the Smith River Valley are going through a process through the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board called the Irrigated Lands Program. They are to develop best management practices around the application of those herbicides and pesticides, which will actually get towards protecting those resources that are vitally important to not only our drinking water, but our fish and wildlife. If we continue to pursue these type of efforts, our natural resources will be protected, along with all human health here in the Smith River Basin.
Thank you for those answers. I was just passed a note in your flyers or with your paperwork. There are question cards. If you could fill those out, and we'll be collecting them for questions at the end from the audience. So my name is Denise Doyle-Schnacker, and I have had the privilege of living in Delaware County for 25 years. And in all of that time, I've witnessed too many incidences where peace officers are ill-equipped to interact with youth and elders in mental health crises. One situation that I will never forget involved a newly recruited officer who had been called by a mother of a young girl in such crisis that she was trying to jump out of the vehicle as it was moving. The officer tried his best to do what he could do, but was unable to help the family through the conflict or to come to a resolution. The situation escalated to the point where the young girl had to be restrained to protect herself and others. This is not a unique situation in Delaware County, so I did some research of my own. In California, 2 hours of de-escalation training is required only once during a 2-year period for peace officers. An intensive training regime is needed to help police officers learn the behaviors and skills to interact appropriately with our community members to keep themselves and others safe. So my question to you: how do you plan to support the sheriff and his staff in securing de-escalation and verbal resolution training beyond the mandated trainings required under the California Penal Code?
Well, this is really more of a process question because the board does not direct the sheriff in any of his activities. We don't micromanage the sheriff. The sheriff comes up with a plan within his budget, and he decides what training is needed, what training is required, and then, of course, we do everything that we can to support that training. The extra training that you're talking about has never been presented, at least in my terms as a supervisor, as something that is needed or I shouldn't say needed because that's his call. Our call would be to make sure that we find the funds to secure the funds to do whatever training he thinks is needed under the circumstances that arise. It saddens me to hear these kind of stories where maybe a little extra training could de-escalate some of this stuff. But that's a question for the sheriff, in my mind, that he needs to bring to us if that's something that needs to happen.
I certainly support any training that could be offered to help the officers in what they're doing. But I think another important point comes up that I think we have a sheriff who is very engaging with the public. And I think once again, this points to community outreach. I think a lot could be done by community outreach. For example, we have a Smith River Neighborhood Watch that we've had for several years now. The sheriff is an active participant at the Neighborhood Watch. He talks to the community. He talks about things that are being worked on. He talks about technologies and other things that can help them do their jobs. So I would advocate that throughout the district, that the sheriff go out and work on what I'm going to call community relations. Another area that I like is what I call community policing, where the community knows who the deputy or who the police officer is. I'm a big believer in that. And I think we have an opportunity in Smith River with a deputy who's been funded by the Tolowa Dene Nation, which we're very grateful for. But that'll be a good opportunity for a sheriff who is familiar with the territory, knows the citizens, and I think that'll go a long ways towards trying to ease tensions and improve the situation.
Thank you. I'm going to try to get this in 1 minute and a half. The law requires 8 hours of critical intervention behavioral health training to better train new police officers on how to effectively interact with persons with mental illness and intellectual disabilities. This course shall be included classroom and instructor-led activities. I work for RHS, Rural Human Services. You don't know those initials. 2 years ago, Rural Human Services supported living services brought a person up from San Francisco at the cost of $4,000. He held a meeting with all emergency services, the police chief, the sheriff, fire, ambulances, and it was a packed house, on how to handle people with intellectual and disabilities. Individuals must be either living on their own or ready to be. In all, there was a packed house. The arrest record for our agency of our clients went down 90% after this training. As a supervisor, I would ask or want Department of Health and Human Services to work with the Sheriff's Department and put this class on every 2 years. Thank you.
Well, we all know this question wouldn't be on this piece of paper unless there was a belief that there was an issue out there. And I appreciate the question being asked. As Supervisor Hemingsen indicated, our sheriff has the discretion within his budget to really sort through these matters and ensure that the required training is out there. But we all know with limited budget, it's very hard to attract law enforcement, whether it's the police in Crescent City or whether it's to the Sheriff's Department and keep and hold them here. So we tend to be a training ground for new recruits. That being said, the training that our sheriff demands from his staff is extremely important to ensuring that these type of situations don't take place. And we need to ensure that the sheriff has everything in his toolbox to ensure that that training occurs. Without it, things might happen that have been suggested here tonight. But we know the sheriff is perfectly capable, and he's demonstrated that over the last 3.5 years of going out and securing grant funding that might allow these type of de-escalation type protocols to occur. And we want to ensure as a board, if he needs help doing that as an elected official, that we do just that. Help him fund those activities.
So, no, the sheriff does not work for the board, and the board doesn't work for the sheriff. We're all electeds. But the board can make suggestions and help set the tone for the community as to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Best way for the training, because I know the sheriff all very well, and he would love to have more training for his officers, but the best way for this is with a train-the-trainer program, where we send one or more persons to learn how to train others. And I would encourage the sheriff to partner with the city and the tribal police departments to defray the cost of the initial training, then share that training among the various enforcement agencies. Law enforcement has specific challenges that non-law enforcement programs do not have. The biggest challenge that they have is they very rarely have the ability to just walk away. They have to stay there and get the job done. Talking too much can get an officer killed, talking not enough, and force can be used when a little more talking might have worked. With 25 years experience in enforcement and dealing with people that have had issues, I took it upon myself to take additional training, so I'm very well versed in this subject. There's some programs out there that are very good, and I think we could afford them. And I would encourage the sheriff to request that, and then try and find a way to get that into the budget, because I think we could afford it and it would be very helpful.
Thank you for your answers to that question. Hello, my name is Jan Wortman, and I'm a Yurok tribal member, and I'm also a Requa resident. In a society where increasingly we're defined by access to information, and what we earn is what we learn. If you don't have access to technology, you're going to be left in the digital dark ages. That's what the digital divide is all about. 1 in 4 people in America are illiterate in technology. The divide will not close unless there's an initiative to seal the gap. President Clinton said, "The greatest opportunity the U.S. has ever had to lift us, its people, out of poverty and ignorance is technology." At Margaret Keating Elementary in Klamath, this is evident. As recently as 4 years ago, internet was not available for daily use by the students, even though the California testing was to be done on a computer. Klamath sent 5th graders to Crescent Elk with little or no computer experience, where in town, the 5th graders were using computers on a daily basis. As a business owner in Klamath, I have Frontier as my internet, and I also pay the Yurok Tribe's internet. I pay 2 bills because there's not enough bandwidth within Delmark County for me to run my business. This is very common in rural and economically depressed areas. So I'm asking you, if you're elected, what will you do to bring high-speed internet to all of our communities and the homes of all of our students? I want to start with Jake.
Thank you. Well, obviously, I certainly support any tools that our students and residents can have, and certainly high-speed internet is a very important part of that. It's a fast-changing world, and we need to be kept abreast of all the technological changes and everything going on in the world. So that being said, I don't believe our county would have funds or funding to complete the infrastructure for high-speed internet. So I think the future in trying to secure it and complete it lies in government and private grants. So we need to try to seek those grants. I kind of did a quick search. There's several grants out there that maybe could be applied for. Of course, it's going to take some qualified grant writers. So I think as supervisor, I can help work with private nonprofit agencies or perhaps county offices to make sure that we have private, grant writers that can write effective grants for us to receive grant funding. Thank you.
Thank you. 8 years ago, I was appointed to an agency called the Tri-Agency. That's 2 members from the harbor, 2 members from the city, and 2 members from the county. At that time, one of the important goals of the Tri-Agency was to get an internet loop around the town so that everybody would be able to have internet access. Right now, the only providers we really have is Charter, and theirs is 99.4% coverage, and Frontier Communications, and then a couple other small ones with even less of the internet access. I will continue to work on upgrading the high-speed internet. The board chair makes board assignments. If the 2 supervisors retained their seats, one of them will be the board chair for the next 4 years. So I'm sure one of them will set up a very important committee. We do need it. I know there are areas that do not have internet. If we're talking about internet in the home, it's available at a very costly price. So again, let's keep working on getting that done.
Continuing the development of our broadband communications here in Delaware County is of extreme importance. As previously mentioned through the tri-agency many years ago, long before I got on the board, many of us served on the commission that really helped to work towards the language around has199.com, which stood for the harbor, the airport, sewer infrastructure, which is at the city, Highway 199, and the .com represented broadband. Through that, we commissioned many studies, one being done by John Irwin. That study was basically to go around this community and look at the possibilities for businesses to use whatever bandwidth was necessary that would pay for the cost for Charter Communications to bring fiber into our community. That was accomplished. Sutter Coast being one of the largest users, the school district being another large user. That helped convince, that report, helped convince this community to become engaged in bringing broadband here. And we were able to do it, not through grants, not through legislation, but through a private party, Charter. They not only brought that broadband here, connecting Curry to Gold Beach, but in doing so, they provided that necessary bandwidth. They also provided the redundancy that we needed. That was extremely important. So if one leg goes down, we're connected to the rest of the world. But we're not done yet. We're not even close to being done. And as you know, we advocate constantly with Caltrans as they're laying new roadway surfaces to put pipeline in the ground. So when that reach to Klamath is accomplished, Jan will have the internet she needs down there at the rec well. Thank you.
High-speed internet to all of Del Norte, or anywhere for that matter, is dependent on two things. Adequate-sized trunk lines connecting the county to the rest of the network, like redundant fiber optic cable, and sufficient bandwidth capacity throughout the county's infrastructure. Some of the telecom cables in the county are overloaded and aging. The ones on my street are. I tried to use Frontier and couldn't. There was constant outages, and they tried to fix it. Said, sorry, you have old twisted pair wiring, and there's no way we can get any more bandwidth to you down the phone lines. So I went to Charter, and so I have high speed at my house now. But I understand the problems. We just need to keep moving more of it underground for a multitude of reasons. Upgrading and replacing the outdated infrastructure being just one. We had more local control over local infrastructure before the state took away the franchise in 2006. But the franchisees don't get to use the infrastructure for free. There's ways to work towards upgrades. There's ways to use the competitive process to have providers expand their own networks and whatnot, like what Chris is talking about. For areas where hardwired options don't exist, the good news is there is a new satellite that's up, and it's working much better than the old one. The problem is it's still expensive and slow compared to wired internet, but the service is available if you can see the sky. So as far as Klamath goes, you don't have to wait for wire to go underground or last chance grade to be rewired. We'll work to get you a satellite so you can hook into the rest of the world.
Yeah, this is an issue that we've been dealing with for a while. There's a program out there called The Last Mile. So there are times when we get the main, I'm going to call it a pipeline, you get the main pipeline through, but off of that pipeline we don't get it out to the people who really need to use it. Klamath is certainly one of those areas. So we've got redundancy from the north, but we don't have any redundancy from the south. I just had a discussion yesterday or last night with Connie Stewart, and she's part of Redwood Coast Connect, and that's a program that's working on the last mile, and she's also working on trying to get a line from the south to get it up here to Del Norte County, and of course that would pass through the Klamath area. And we're very supportive of all of those things going on. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of resources. It takes a company who can see some profit at the end of the tunnel on this. It's very difficult. So in those cases, we need to have partnerships. We need to grow those partnerships and keep that infrastructure moving. It's a very difficult line to bring in from the south. Not that the ones from the north were much easier. As Supervisor Howard said, that redundant line that we got from the north for the hospital was instrumental in bringing a lot of telemedicine and things like that they can use. Thank you.
Thank you for those answers. And before we get to the next question, for those of you that have questions or have wrote your questions down, please pass them to the aisle side of your row, please, so somebody can come by and pick those up. Right behind you, they're waving their hands. They will be coming around to pick those up. And we'll go ahead and continue with the next question.
Good evening. My name is Pastor Dana Gilport, and I am the pastor at Crescent City United Methodist Church. I'm relatively new to Crescent City. I moved here in July, and since I started my service here, I have had daily people come up to me requesting services, financial need, food, shelter, anything that we can possibly give. And I know that I do not stand alone in that in other churches in this area. So we've been researching. We've been doing our research. And on the screen, you'll see an example of Dignity Village from Olympia, Washington. And we have found that the Dignity Villages are the most effective way to house and take care of the homeless and houseless situation overall. And so, with that being said, if elected, will you support the creation of a Dignity Village model, which is a form of transitional housing where people who are homeless can have access to safe, stable, temporary housing, which includes sanitation, cooking facilities, and relevant community services? And will you commit to helping lead a community-wide task force that will actively seek and implement sustainable solutions to homelessness in our county? And we'll go to Ron first for this one.
Okay, thank you. For 4 years, I've been advocating that we have something along the lines of the Dignity Village. There were 4 of us at RHS who were veterans, and we were finding that there were a number of veterans who were living out in the backcountry here that did not have homes. So we started looking at intake centers. We made 5 different trips out of town, looking at how different agencies were handling the veteran homeless. This led into a bigger and better, maybe. We brought the city, the county, and the DHS, Department of Social Services, in, and we had a number of meetings. Senator McGuire went out and leveraged a number of funds to have permanent housing built for homeless people. The county just received a large grant to do the study for that. So I think we're well on our way to having something along the line of a Dignity Village. We have a number of homeless people that have different problems. Some of them would never live in a home, and then there's others with families that would love some type of a little space where they could take a shower and be able to store their stuff. The problem with a lot of it is that they have dogs, so anytime we put something together like that, we need to think about pets.
Caring for the homeless in our community is a real challenge, and it's well recognized throughout the state that this challenge just does not lie here in Delaware County. It lies everywhere. You see it in differing degrees. Forming transitional housing costs money, and we need to be progressive in going out there and trying to find that money. Currently, as mentioned by Mr. Phillips, we have a committee formed to work with Senator McGuire, and that's Supervisor Hemingsen and Supervisor Cowan, who have diligently worked alongside of him to help make sure those resources are here. We're finally moving forward with a study. It's going to be effective at determining how best those transitional type housings are put in place. But until then, there's going to be a resource need here at Health and Human Services to help provide for those already here, whether it's our veterans or whether it's our mentally ill homeless out on the street. We've got programs in place like CalWorks that addresses housing assistance, support programs, and family stabilization. But sometimes it's just not enough. Sometimes there's people that we can't reach. And those are going to be the difficult people to deal with. But we do have a mental health services department here. It's run by Jack Brazil, and he does a good job with the limited resources he can to provide for the homeless here in our community. But we still cannot stop there. Us as elected officials must continue talking with the state to ensure that every resource that is available, we're going out and trying to find.
Dignity Village is an excellent example of people in a community meeting the needs of people within their community. Provides a pathway out of homelessness at a minimal cost to the taxpayer while empowering the disadvantaged with dignity. It truly is a hand up and not just a hand out. Keys to its success are one, it requires sweat equity from all the participants. It's a transitional program with the goal of providing adequate short-term shelter in a safe, supportive environment, and it has the support of the community government services. For those that don't know, Dignity Village, the one in Portland, is county land, and they turned it into a campground. And then the homeless went out and got donations and built their own camping cabins. And so they have a little community center. They have room for 60 people. They're limited to that number. During the winter, if there's a cold snap, they can bring an extra 10 in and set up tents. But they're self-policing, self-run, and they have a contract with the city. And it's had phenomenal success. They've been doing that, since 2004, I think. So for the last 10 years, they've helped a lot of people transition out of homelessness and into being self-sufficient. So I strongly support that type of program.
Yes. If that's the model that we want to use, as was mentioned, Supervisor Cowan and I have been working very closely with Senator McGuire on the No Place Like Home initiative. We were told we were awarded $75,000, but that is all tied up in courts now in legal questions, so we actually haven't received the money. I don't know exactly when we will receive the money, but the whole idea behind that were to explore ideas like this, like the Dignity Village, some sort of housing component that will work within our community. And whether something like this will work in our community until we have some sort of study, I don't know. If it's feasible, if it works for our community, I'm certainly all in favor of doing something. We do need to take care of the homeless population, especially if there's any homeless with children or veterans. If this is something that works, if this is something that we could fit into our community, it certainly should be something that we all support. Thank you.
Well, we certainly do want to be compassionate and help the homeless population. However, we have to recognize that our county does not have enough doctors, therapists, or job training to meet the demands that are placed on us. And some of you may be aware that we are transporting patients as far as 500 miles south for medical and psychiatric care. So we have to recognize that we don't have the resources to properly take care of the population. I believe that homelessness is truly a statewide crisis, and perhaps it may even be a federal crisis for us, because we have a homeless population coming from other states here, because our weather's nice. So I can't say that I blame them, but that's the situation that we have. So I think because of that, it also makes it a state/federal issue. What I would support is a task force that would include federal and state representatives to work together towards what I believe should be a goal of having regional help centers that would have everything in one location to help the homeless, whether it be medical care, psychiatric care, job training, counseling. I feel that would be the best way to handle it and have all the services centralized.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Barcelo. Buenas tardes. Yo me llamo Cynthia Barcelo. When I walk into places of business in Delaware County, I can feel when I'm not welcomed. either by staff, by other patrons, or both. I get short answers or no answers at all. I've heard countless stories of people in our community being treated with little to no respect because of their color of their skin, their accent, their race. Children, adults, and elders in our county have gone through prejudice. Racism is nothing new in Del Norte. We cannot allow this to continue in our community. As a mother, I want my children to grow up having the same opportunity and respect as other children. Time after time, studies show that people of color are treated more harshly in the criminal justice system. We have a law that passed in the state of California to help protect immigrants in our state. This law, the California Values Act, was recently attempted to be repealed by at least 2 supervisors in our county. We all know racism exists, especially in Del Norte County. So what will you do, big or small, to help end institutional racism? We'll go ahead and start with Chris.
I truly don't want to believe racism exists in Del Norte County, but the fact of the matter is, it does. I just received a phone call tonight, a 4-minute rant from somebody who shouted out hatred about the Talawadini Nation and something they wanted to do for their people, and left a 4-minute message on my answering machine at my county office, spewing this crap. Does racism exist here in Del Norte County? There's no question about it in my mind now. And that's disappointing for somebody who's trying to raise a family here and try to teach their kids those right values. I saw some examples this week that I'm not proud of. It's blurring the lines, but it's not recognizing the fact that me as a white guy here in this community, I'm not going to feel what you are feeling as a colored person here in this community. And that's one of those things that we as Board of Supervisors need to try to break down those barriers and really come to the recognition that we all live here together. And however I can help make that communication happen, I'm going to. But we have a balanced approach that needs to be reached. And one of those examples, as you mentioned with SB 54 this week, was nothing more than an embarrassment for this community to spend 3 hours on a discussion that did not need to take place.
I'm old enough to remember when segregation was legal and considered normal. I remember how intolerant of minorities white society was prior to the Civil Rights Act, and a lot has been done to reduce or eliminate racism, and much, much more remains to be done. Ending racism is a worthy and noble cause. Challenges it with some types of racism and prejudice are easy to identify and deal with, and others, individual prejudices are easy to spot, and a person can be called out for being a racist. Internal racism is a little harder to work with. That's when a person believes that all members of a group are prejudiced against them, and it's similar to paranoia, but just because you have it doesn't mean that they're not out to get you. But your question was about institutional racism. It's very hard to reduce or eliminate because the people doing it usually don't even know that they're doing it. Institutional racism occurs when programs or agencies treat a minority group differently than the way they treat a majority group. Sometimes disparate treatment is caused by desire to help and ends up harming. I try to lead by example, point out racism when I see it. I do my best to be open to observations of others when I err or show signs of it. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to improve. I would encourage all departments and programs to be as race and ethnic neutral as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, there's no place for racism, especially in Del Norte County, because it's where I live. But there's no place for racism, period. I think the internet does a lot to do away with that, because when you're texting on your phone, if you don't know the color of somebody's skin or their ethnic background or whatever their beliefs are. So I think we're on the right track, and even though it's not moving fast enough, but we do need to eliminate it. We do need to lead by example. And you play a part in it. Everyone plays a part in that. You want to make sure that you don't elect someone to a position like this that you believe is racist. So I think that's where it starts in the institutional part of the racism, where we have boards or institutions, whatever that term means, that we don't let those people get into those organizations and spread that. It's not something that we should put up with.
I do not condone or tolerate racism of any type. I was very proud to have Hispanic Americans sign my nomination petition when I ran for office, when I began my run for office. One of my very first actions that I did as a candidate was I went to the Talowa Dene Nation office and discussed my position paper about what I wanted to do to improve this county. The tribal council, the tribe invited me to go before the council, which I did, which I understand was a great honor to do that. It was my pleasure to go over my positions with them, and afterwards they were kind enough to invite my wife and I to their community dinner, which we thoroughly enjoyed. We had an opportunity to speak with members of the tribe. It was a very rewarding experience. Other than myself setting an example, I believe the best way to help combat racism is within the home. Parents should talk with their children, they should know who their friends are, and most importantly, they should monitor social media. As supervisor, I will look out for the interests of all residents, regardless of ethnicity or economic status. Thank you.
Thank you. As a child, we moved from the South to California, which was a blessing because living in the South, you do see racism, or at least when I was young. When we moved to California, my mother taught me, and by all times, I was to treat everybody equal. Today, I still continue to embrace diversity and inclusion. As the director of the food bank, we deal with people of all colors, of all other types of human behavior, and I treat them with the respect that I do with anyone else. I will always, as a supervisor, defend and protect the people who do not think the way I do or act the way I do, but I will never hold that against them.
Thanks again for all those answers. We're going to go ahead and go forward with the questions that were brought up here to us from you. We have collected these questions and from you guys in the audience and work hard to organize them in a subject matter. So I'm going to pull out some of these questions and ask, and again, we will ask candidates that you will have the same amount of time to answer the question, 1.5 minutes to do that. We'll get to as many as we can with the time allowing. So the first question I have here is, not a single one of you mentioned enforcing pesticide spraying when winds are higher than 10 miles per hour. WTF. Will you take action to enforce these regulations? Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so this is a very important piece, and I'm going to try to shorten it down to what I can. Each specific pesticide or herbicide has label instructions on how it's applied. That's regulated by the state of California Department of Pesticide Regulation. The farmers need to follow those instructions, plain and simple. If they're not, regulation needs to be absolutely enforced, whether it's the county ag department, or whether it's the Department of Pesticide Regulations, or the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, which has an enforcement arm. Bottom line, if it's not being done, it needs to be enforced. And there are regulatory arms currently existing within the state of California in order to do that.
As to why nobody answered that question is because that portion wasn't on the written question that we were all given to prepare for. So I doubt anybody had time to really come up with an answer until just now. But yeah, what Chris said is enforcement of the law is really important. 25 years experience doing that. I know what the challenges are, and there are different agencies that enforce different aspects of it. Until it was brought up tonight, I was unaware that the wind speed wasn't being monitored and that wasn't being enforced. That'd be something I'd look into very closely to see what can be done, what should be done, and how it can be done. Thank you.
Yeah, there are rules and regulations on spraying when the wind is blowing at a certain speed. You know, we on the Board of Supervisors, we are not an enforcement arm. We are kind of complaint driven. If you see something that's not happening correctly, you would complain to us, then we would get in touch with the proper authorities. That's the ag, in this particular case, that's the ag department. They're supposed to monitor, I believe, at certain times. They're supposed to be notified at times when spraying is occurring. And if those things are not being adhered to, then that's the time that if you can't get satisfaction from the ag department or the person that's supposed to do the inspection, then yes, come to us. We can get to the bottom of all those things. That's an important part of what, at least what I do, is I can be that liaison between the people that have an issue, don't know who to get a hold of, and don't know when they should get a hold of them. So if you've got an issue like this and you're seeing something happening that you don't think should happen, sure, give us a call. We'll either put you in touch with the department that you need to be in touch with, or we'll do it ourselves and pass that information along to you, or make sure that we get that enforcement agent out to you.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. We do have several regulatory agencies at the state and local level. So I think complaints should be made when violations occur, and I expect action to be taken. When I was a state bureaucrat for Caltrans, I would get as many as 100 phone calls a day. I responded to every one of them. I even responded to calls that weren't even in my purview. I responded back to them. So as Supervisor Hemingsen mentioned, if you're not getting satisfaction at the local or state level, I would want to know about it and do what I can to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I mentioned earlier about town hall meetings. And if this is a consistent problem, I think it would be a good topic to be brought up, have the farmers present, have the regulatory agencies present, and talk about it and see what can be done, hear public input, and see what can be done to remedy the situation.
What else can I say? We all want to make sure that everybody is safe from pesticides. It is true. All pesticides are labeled to tell you what you can do and when you can do it. If the wind comes up, you need to cease doing your spraying. I know that that's economically a problem because now you've got an employee who is going to have something else to do. But as far as the Board of Supervisors, all we can do is get a hold of an agency that's responsible for doing the monitoring of that pesticide.
Thank you. The next question I have here is, how do you think the proposed new cannabis tax should be spent? Mr. Hemingsen?
Well, that's interesting because we haven't passed the cannabis tax yet, but there's a lot of components to what we would do with tax with the the taxes that we receive. We've had requests for an educational component. We're certainly going to need probably in every case that I've talked to anybody who's put this tax on cannabis, that they need to backfill money that they've gotten from permits and things like that they get fees for, the application fees, the filing fees, all of those types of fees that they pay are supposed to pay for some sort of enforcement on what they're doing. And so I think there needs to be a portion of those taxes that are held to make sure that we can continue that enforcement, so that we can continue doing the things that keep those people that are growing cannabis in line. But I do think an educational component certainly is something that needs to be addressed.
Well, thank you. I understand that, if cannabis were to be approved in the county, that we would have considerable code enforcement, law enforcement required, not necessarily for the legal cannabis, but for the illegal cannabis, especially if we do cultivation or other activities. So I would foresee that quite a bit of that tax would be used for our enforcement arms. But if we had extra money, I would certainly like to see beautification cleanup efforts that could be funded to help beautify the county. That would help revive our economy and address other issues that we have. So I certainly think that there's a lot of potential for the cannabis tax if it were to be approved. But I do think a big chunk of it would be eaten up by enforcement.
Thank you. When and if it ever gets passed, I'd like to see the excess money that would be generated to go to two different agencies. One, we lived in Nevada for a number of years, and there every child was guaranteed to go to some form of schooling after high school. That was from the cigarette tax. And we could do that here. We could have every child be able to go to, say, Redwood or to the college of their choice for a couple years. But also I'd like to see a big portion of it go to the mental health and improve the mental health in Del Norte County.
Well, given that fees sometimes don't cover all of the cost, even though that's what they're supposed to be for. So yeah, tax should backfill whatever the fee doesn't cover, so that the whole program is cost neutral. But should there be surplus, best thing to do is put that into the general fund. When you have a big budget like the state does, you can direct funds from taxes into special programs, and they find ways to fund other things. With a small jurisdiction like Del Norte, the challenge is balancing the budget, and we really need surplus funds to backfill those that are struggling, so that we don't have to cut services in order to balance the budget. As past president of the employees union, there's many times we had to take furloughs, reduce services, reduce hours because there wasn't enough money to keep staff working. I would prefer to have that go into a rainy day fund, a contingency fund, to keep the county working and keep providing services without interruption.
My hope is that the permitting fees that we have around commercial grow, if it does pass, around retail, around transportation, trace and track, my hope is that those fees would help cover some of the functions that would be needed through code enforcement and through the sheriff's department in order to go out and clean up the black market grows. It's been estimated by the sheriff here that we probably have close to 110 grows here currently in the county. That will have to be dealt with in some way, shape, or form. It's not nearly the problem that Humboldt County has, but it's still a problem here. If taxes were to pass, and hopefully that will be on the ballot, as I've advocated for just this last Tuesday with my fellow board members, I'd like to see some percentage go to prevention and education. because there will be youth coming into our community that may or may not see their neighbor, their parent, or somebody they actually look up to and respect using a controlled substance. There's going to have to be education around that. That would come from a tax dollar. And as I advocated for on Tuesday, I'd like to see some of that money go there, but it's very hard to pass a tax with that percentage of a vote, which is 66.7%. At this time, I think we'll move forward with something that's a little bit more unrestricted, just to get a flavor of what's best for this community. But I'd really like to see some of that money go towards education and prevention.
Thank you. Next question I have here. Will you strongly oppose offshore oil and gas drilling for Donor and California?
Yes.
Strongly oppose offshore drilling for California. If there was a real need for it, it'd be a different question. But currently, there isn't a need for it. We don't have cars lined up down the street trying to get gas and oil, and there isn't any need to tap into those reserves. No need at all. We have plenty in safer locations. So I'd say I would support preventing that from happening to our coastline. It's far too fragile and it's far too dangerous to be drilling offshore and risk destroying our fragile environment.
Yeah, we've had this come before the board before, and we have unanimously opposed offshore drilling. So yes, I would oppose offshore drilling.
I'm a little uneasy about the offshore drilling. I would prefer to drill on land than ocean. The technology I don't think is quite there. I don't think we're quite ready yet. So I probably would want to look at that carefully, but right now I would be probably not totally in favor of offshore drilling.
As one of the 5 harbor commissioners, we signed a letter and sent. There we go. We sent the letter off opposing the offshore drilling. So yes, I'm in favor of opposing the offshore drilling.
Thank you. This one, I think, starts with a comment first and then the question. Sexual harassment threatens well-being and productivity of many people. What would you do to change the norms around sexual harassment?
Well, it's kind of similar to the racism issue. I think we should always lead by example. We should always lead by example. Of course, treat each other equally. I think where possible, provide training, outreach, training, education on sexual harassment. It's a terrible, terrible thing. I certainly don't condone that as well. So I think the key is, number one, I set an example, which I intend to do. Number 2, work with the community, offer training, sensitivity training, whatever it would take to help with that. And again, just try to set an example and then work with others and talk about it and how terrible it is.
At work, we have sexual harassment training about once every 2 years. So we're well aware of what can go on and how to not have that come up and how to handle it when it does come up.
Sexual harassment, that's no means no, sorry. When there's an accusation of sexual harassment, it has to be dealt with quickly. As a shop steward, I've had to defend people that were accused of it. And fortunately, they were immediately put on administrative leave while we went through the process to find out whether or not the claim was founded or unfounded. In some of those, the claims were legitimate, and that person had to be terminated. The union was dedicated to making sure that due process was followed, but while it was being followed, the victims were safe and secured. So that person's on admin leave, and the union supported that and keeping them away from the workplace while it went through the investigation and debate process, and we've got it all figured out. And the person that did that ended up getting additional training and help so that they wouldn't be a danger to others in the future, but it pretty much terminated their county employment. And so I feel very strongly about this, and it has to come from the top. The department heads and supervisors have to make it clear that sexual harassment and inappropriate behavior will not be tolerated at all. I strongly favor a zero tolerance policy for inappropriate behavior.
Did everybody get a chance?
Yeah, there's no place for sexual harassment in the workplace for sure, or any place else for that matter. I'm also in favor of equal pay for equal work.
Back to Chris.
Back to Chris. Yeah, that's good.
I'll keep it brief. I know you have a lot of questions. There is no place for it in the workplace, period. It has to end.
Thank you. Next question. Based off the discussion around SB 54, how would you bridge the divide and foster teamwork to encourage professionalism and true problem solving?
Yeah, it's your turn to go first.
Would you read that again, please?
Absolutely. Based off of the discussion around SB 54, how would you bridge the divide and foster teamwork to encourage professionalism and true problem solving?
Well, I think it starts with having people who are willing to work together. One of the problems we have, it seems like, on the Board of Supervisors now is that people are not willing to work together. I just got to watch a little bit of the Board of Supervisors meeting on Tuesday, and the number of speakers that came before and talked about how the supervisors were not working together. One person actually went as far as saying that they needed to go out to dinner and or go on Gerry's boat and get drunk and have dinner and come back and be friends. So, but we need to be able to work together, all of us.
I think the question centered around SB 54, but I do want to respond to Mr. Phillips' comments about working together. It's pretty hard to work together sometimes when you go through years of harassment from your colleagues. And whether it's in social media or other places, you need to set a higher standard as an elected official, and that's the bottom line. Now, the board has been accused of not working together, but just looking back through last year, we work together all the time. Matter of fact, we passed almost unanimously just about everything that has come before us. And there's a few issues that get us stumped. But you know what? As elected officials, we actually have to deal with it. One of those was SB 54 the other day. It's an issue that may or may not have needed to come before us. Del Norte County clearly does not need to be the tip of the spear when it comes to SB 54. But as was clearly stated yesterday, there is not one person on the Board of Supervisors that wants to weaken our sheriff's ability to enforce the laws of the United States or the state of California. But social media again this morning, there it is. Chris Howard, Gerry, Hemingsen, Lori Cowan support the California Values Act. You know what? Social media is going to be there. It's going to begin to bring you down. It's going to be done by certain people on our board. We generate a thick skin around it, and that's just the way it's going to be. But we are going to work together to try to get to a common goal and make sure our arrows are all moving together in that same direction.
you restate the question, please?
Sure. Based off of the discussion around SB 54, how would you bridge the divide and foster teamwork to encourage professionalism and to true problem solving?
Okay, so contentious subjects tend to come up from time to time, and it's not so much about what your answer is to the contentious subject. It's putting forth your opinion based on your research and your understanding of the subject matter, and then arguing the points of the subject before you. And don't get involved, don't get sucked into arguing over personalities or whether somebody's ugly or their mother dressed them funny or whatever you think about them personally. It's what are the merits of the subject before you at that moment. And take a stand in what you truly believe. Figure out what it is that you believe and say it. I've never, hemmed and hawed around something. The only thing, if I got one that I don't understand, I say, you know what, I can't answer that right now because I haven't done enough research. I'm going to have to get back to you. But once I've done my research, find out what the pros and cons are, what the constituents want, don't want. Sometimes it requires a town hall meeting to get more input so you truly know what the community wants to do with it. But never, ever, ever think that our voice as Delaware County is insignificant or unimportant. We are just as important as any other county in the state. We are a county. We're not, to beg pardon the phrase, the red-headed stepchildren. You have to sit at this little table off to the side at Thanksgiving dinner. We're not a big county, but we're just as important as any other county.
Yeah, it's important to be a team player in order to get teamwork. So you have to be looking for the goal of what's best for the community. So to be a team player, you have to be looking out for other people's interests, not your own. I truly believe the right decision was made on SB 54. I think we need to find out where it stands, what it stands for, and then once we know that, we don't have the resources to challenge anything like this. We don't have the staff, we don't have the time to get involved with this. So I think there are other counties that are looking into this, they're going to check it out, and then we'll find out where we stand with that, and we'll move forward. But when you're talking about teamwork, you have to be focused on what the prize is, where the goal is, where we're going. Make sure that we're working for the community, not just for headlines and our self-interests.
Well, my whole career at Caltrans, I was mired in controversy that I had to work with. We'd have legislation, we'd have policies, we'd have procedures that was going to make somebody mad. You couldn't get around it. It was going to happen. And it was my job to try to smooth that out. I would like to say that I was very successful in working with others, finding common ground. It's okay to disagree. We're going to have disagreements. We're not always going to get along. But it's about working together, being respectful, respecting each other. I'd like to say that my opponent and I, so far, have had a respectful campaign. It's okay to disagree on issues. That's fine. But be respectful and do it in a respectful manner. Set an example.
Thank you. Next question. What is your position on allowing STAA size trucks to navigate Highway 199? Go for it.
This is something I've been working on very closely since 2007. As a young biologist with Green Diamond Research Company, I helped spearhead our role to get the funding for Highway 199. And the STAA funding was the only mechanism that we could find to help straighten out the curves on Highway 199 and make it safe for everybody. It was the only funding mechanism in place to get that red route status off of Delaware County. And we were able to secure those funds, all of it for construction of those 5 road points. And as Senator Mike McGuire stated in his town hall address just this last year, 199 and those fixes that prevent us from having a highway, and more importantly, a bridge that wasn't necessarily built in 1921 that still had Model A vehicles rolling over it, needs to be completed for the safety of everybody in our community, not just trucks, not just the RVs, but everybody traveling on it. Highway 199 needs to be fixed, it needs to get out of the courts, and it needs to proceed.
Back in my younger days, I drove a big truck, and I know how hard it is to get around a tight curve. I strongly support fixing Highway 199, making it safer to navigate. Now that I'm retired and I have an RV trailer to go behind my 1-ton truck, I would really like to have a little bit wider curve to get around, because it's scary trying to navigate 199. As far as the STAA trucks, we have more trucks hauled with the smaller trailers, making more trips than the larger trucks would. If we could get the road big enough to make it safe for the AA trucks, then that would actually reduce the truck traffic on the highway and make it safer for everybody. So I strongly support getting that project completed.
Yeah, just like Supervisor Howard said, we've been working on this for a long time. Since 2007 is when I got involved with it. And we've been working on it extremely hard. I think there's a lot of miscommunication about on what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve infrastructure. We're trying to improve our transportation corridor. This east-west route is extremely important economically. And so we need to make sure that it's the best that we can make it with the restrictions that we're going to have. The communication about the trucks, that these are bigger, faster, heavier trucks, oftentimes I just have to cringe when I hear that. They're longer. They're not heavier. They're not any faster. They're usually the same tractor, pulling a different trailer. These are industry standard trucks. This is what they use. So if you have an industry standard truck that comes to a route that's not STAA approved, they have to reload their cargo into a smaller truck, or maybe 2 smaller trucks, and then bring them over. So added expense in both the reload and possibly more trucks. This is a corridor that we need to keep improving. Is it going to be perfect? Most roads aren't perfect, but is it going to be better? It's going to be a lot better.
Well, I do support the completion of 199. Having worked for Caltrans and seen the good work that Caltrans has done, Caltrans is one of the most environmentally active, technically savvy organizations, I think, in the world. So that being said, we make the improvements, but we're still going to have curves on that road. We're still going to have trucks, RVs, bigger vehicles with close calls. It's going to happen. So what I'm calling for, and what I think is important, that we work with our enforcement partners, such as the CHP, to make sure that they do proper enforcement on the road. And then beyond that, I would advocate, if it hasn't already been done, I would advocate for other safety improvements, such as rock slide guards, where we need them, turnout lanes, other improvements, which may or may not be in the mill, but I'll find out.
Like several others, I've been paying attention to this since 2008. We've done a lot of work on 199, straightening out curves, putting in new bridges. We've also been tied up in court on a number of projects. So what we need to do is to be able to get this out of the court system and get the funding to be able to straighten it out. Having been in the trucking industry many, many years ago, I know that it does cost you quite a bit of money to have to unload a 45-foot trailer into 2 other trailers. And a lot of the different companies aren't willing to come this way just simply because they can't bring a payable load. So I think the best thing for us is to continue working on straightening out the road and getting it safe for not just the trucks, but these people pulling the 48-foot trailer mobile homes behind them. So they're just as dangerous as the trucks, because many times they're not the professionals.
Thank you. On to the next question. What will you do to improve medical or hospital services here?
Ooh, to improve medical and hospital services. Yeah, that's a fun one. So I was at the healthcare district meeting last night and spoke to people there and listened to where we were currently at. And there's been some progress made with Sutter. Not enough progress, but there's been some progress made, which is good news. We have to keep the pressure on to improve. This subject is so deep and there's so much to it that there's no way I could cover it in a minute and a half. I'd love to talk to people afterwards about this because I know a lot about it. My mom was an RN forever, and at one point in my career I was a CNA, so healthcare, I'm really familiar with that. But there's a lot more that can be done, and it needs to be done, and I strongly support getting it done.
Yeah, I think we've made some extremely important progress forward with our new infusion center and the soon-to-happen dialysis center that is a different company than Sutter. The infusion center is part of Sutter Health, but the dialysis center is a different company. And so those are 2 big things that we have never had in this community. So there's progress being made. A lot of people rely on urgent care. We have the wellness center. Those are things that were instituted, or the wellness center was instituted quite some time ago, and it is continually expanding and doing a better job. We do have an extremely difficult time in recruiting and retaining doctors. We seem that once we seem to get them here, we can't seem to hang on to them. So it's a difficult process. Dr. Martinelli worked fairly closely with him when he had that program going. And he did a pretty good job at the time. And once he stopped doing it, once he left the area, that kind of fizzled away. So maybe we need to get that up and going again so that we can get more medical professionals here. But I think the strides that we're making in at least specialized services is going in the right direction.
Well, I do agree that the recruitment of doctors and staff are a problem. So I think that's partially based because we don't have a lot of shopping options here. I think it's tough to recruit doctors and staff. And as I go door to door, I talk to a lot of people, and maybe some of you are in the same situation. You go to Medford or Grants Pass or Brookings for your medical care. So we need to have a goal of trying to get these patients back and trying to recruit doctors, making our town more attractive, continue to work with Sutter to try to keep the cost down. I'd like to see more private insurance plans offered. And I think if we can lure more people here to buy homes and try to get more tourists to stay here and increase demand, that will also increase our medical services and help us move forward with trying to provide more services for our residents.
First of all, I want to thank Dr. Duncan and Dr. Caldwell. About 3 to 4 years ago, they brought to us through a number of meetings that they had the difficulties that we were faced with Sutter Coast Hospital and the other places that are taken care of by Sutter Coast. It is true we have, over the course of time, we've been able to bring in other services like the dialysis center. But one of the things that we need to do is first get our town cleaned up so that it is presentable when people come. I heard the story here a while back that the person who does the hiring for Sutter Coast takes his new clients up that he wants to bring here up to Brookings for dinner, so he doesn't have to show them around the town. So we need to work hard in keeping the town nice and clean, and then we need to bring in doctors who realize that this is a small town and there aren't a lot of services, but that want to live in a rural area. So we need to continue working on that.
This is an ongoing problem as expressed by everybody up here on this stage. Back when I was with the Chamber of Commerce, the program that Supervisor Hemingsen spoke to was our Physicians Retention Recruitment Program. It was a very involved group in the community, which actually, back in the days of John Manaugh, Sutter Coast helped to fund. It was a position dedicated at the Chamber of Commerce, which in turn was given to the director at the time, Gina Zatola, where we basically had a red team that went out and as Sutter Coast or other docks found physicians, we'd have them here to greet the community and help them integrate, because it was very tough for spouses to integrate here in Delaware County. It still happens here to this day. But we've improved over time retaining our physicians here. We're still going to get turnover because of our area with those spouses that just can't come in, but we need to reenact those programs like the Physicians Retention Recruitment Program to help ensure that our physicians stay here. And as we begin to build conversations and relationships with whatever health provider that we do end up with here, whether it's Sutter, whether it's Asante, we need to ensure that they're providing the best care here, because in District 3, healthcare is one of our most important topics. As our elderly age, they need to have that cost of healthcare being provided reasonably. And it clearly isn't being provided right now. And as the Board of Supervisors and the City Council and the Healthcare District have discussed many times over with Sutter Coast, that has to change, and it has to change now.
Thank you. So Ron Phillips, it says here. Didn't the RHS start looking into temporary housing in the community for veterans that are homeless? What happened to it?
What happened to it? We, like I said earlier, we went out and investigated a lot of different agencies to deal with homeless veterans. We found out that by working with Gerry County and the VA out of Portland, we were able to get 6 of the homeless people that qualified into housing here in Delaware County. That program that we started out with then evolved into what is now the No Family Left Behind. Again, we're still in the beginning stages. I look forward to hopefully in the next couple of years be able to see something from a planning grant and get that on the road. But right now, we're just, we're not even meeting anymore. We had a large group of people that were meeting once a month, and then we had supervisors and city council people and then nonprofit people that were left the area or had actually changed positions, and so it kind of fell apart, but we need to put it back together.
Thank you. So we'll move to the next question. Will you support the commitments that the BOS made in the Children's Budget Resolution by dedicating at least 50% of the cannabis cultivation tax to children's services and programs?
Unfortunately, I'm not privy to those discussions, and I cannot comment on that because I would need to see the budget, I would need to see the discussion, and I'm not privy to that, so I'm not able to answer that question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we had this discussion at our last board meeting about dedicating funds. Very difficult thing to do, especially when you don't know what that fund amount is going to be. I certainly am in favor of having an educational component within that taxation. But before we know what we're going to end up with, or where we're going to need those funds, I think we're going to have to take a hard look at what funds are going to be needed to continue the program that we have in place.
As I said before, being a small budget, it's kind of tight. It's best not to dedicate funds before you have them. Otherwise, programs that you already have that are desperately needed in the community don't get the money they need. So, like Gerry said, it's really hard to know how much money it's going to come in and what you're going to be able to do with it. Strongly support those programs, but to pre-dedicate the funds before you know how much you're going to have, that's not sound fiscal management.
Every item on the Board of Supervisors agenda has some check boxes at the bottom that address this question specific to children here in our community and how the needs of our children will be met with that action item that the board takes. It's one that goes back to the children's budget we passed many years ago, but supports a direction like with our 3 Read 23 program, which basically states by 3rd grade, every child will be reading by 2023. Those are programs not only at this board, our city council, our school board, everybody in this community should be supportive of, but it takes dollars to get there. And with the community of limited resources, those dollars need to come from somewhere. And that's exactly why on Tuesday, as Gerry mentioned, we advocated very strongly for a component of whatever tax plan comes out to be set aside, some portion of that for prevention and education. Hopefully that can be done, but passing a tax measure in this county doesn't often happen very easy. So we'll see how we best move forward, but I'd love to see some funds set aside specifically for children in our area.
I'm going to agree with everybody. I think that we need to, whatever it does come about, we need to sit down and look at the budget and decide that where we're going to put our tax dollars. I would advocate for education, whether it be education in the drug rehab or the drug use, or if it was in sending our children on to junior college if they weren't able to go to a regular full-time college, or I would also look at being able to one other idea. Leave it at that.
It's a long night. It's a long night, hasn't it?
Thank you. And one last question. Home care. In-home support services workers currently earn minimum wage. No one can deny the positive economic impact and wage increase would have on our local economy. If elected, what would you do to support a living wage for home care workers?
Yeah, in-home supportive services does a great job for the county. They work hard. They have a lot of duties to perform. And as that minimum wage is coming up, that's a program that's very difficult to fund on our side of it. It's discussions that we've had. We have issues with minimum wage now.
I have no comments.
Anyway, we have problems with even within the regular departments of the county, with compaction as that minimum wage grows, that we've got the people coming up, bumping up against wages that we've paid for a while to employees that have been there for a while. So it's a difficult situation. And while I'm very supportive of the group, it's a very difficult problem to deal with when those costs come from the general fund.
Well, I certainly want to support our providers. And, what I've seen and what I'm aware of is there's a lot of what I'm going to call the frontline providers, not just home care, but HHS, the social workers that are not making a good wage. And that's problematic. They're on the first line. They should be compensated, appropriately. So if I was king and I haven't seen the budget and I don't know what's in the budget, I won't find out until I get elected. But I certainly would take a look at some kind of scale where we could either move money over somehow to try to compensate or do something. I don't know what's in the budget, and I probably won't find out until I get there. But I do believe that we need to compensate our first line providers.
It is. The budget is public, she said.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. I know a number of people that are in that are home health care providers, and they've got families to raise, and they have everything to do just like the rest of us. We need to look at it and find out where the money can come from to give them a raise. I know that the minimum wage increase by California standards is going up, and it's supposed to be $15, I don't know, in 4 more years or 3 years, whatever it is. But that doesn't help today. So when I get on the board, if I'm elected, I will look at that and see how we can adjust and make some adjustments there. I make that promise to you. That's about the only promise I'm going to make, but I will make that one to you.
We have well over 300 in-home service providers here in Del Norte County. And as Jake said, they are the front lines to healthcare here in our community for many that can't provide. It's a very difficult situation, as Gerry Hemingsen alluded to provide for those with an ever-decreasing minimum wage. And we need to find a way to do that within the confines of our general fund. As shouted out here in the audience, the county's budget, it's a transparent process. It's available to anybody. You can walk right in and get it. I'd love to see some research done by those coming into office that spells that out. If it's available to you now and you've got an idea, don't wait till you're sitting on the board to bring that to our attention. If there's a solution out there, bring it to us now. But the bottom line is our frontline service men and women that are providing that home health care need, it's a very valuable service here. And when the state has a mandate that the county is going to provide that service, we have to find a way within our general fund to do it. But it's difficult. Let me tell you, it's very difficult. So if you guys have a solution, please help us find it. Don't wait till you're elected.
When I was sitting on the executive board for the employees union, I went through that county budget with a fine-tooth comb every year, looking for money for raises, looking for money to save positions, looking for ways to prevent layoffs. I can tell you there's not a lot of fat on that bone. However, our wages county-wide are subpar. All of the county workers are underpaid, the rank and file. And the key to that is to increase the revenue to the county. And I'm not talking tax increases, I'm talking about spurring the economy, the engine that drives the county, to bring more money into the coffers so that we can pay people a living wage. People should not have to work for a minimum wage to support their families. The minimum wage is a trainee wage. That's what it's intended for. You're not supposed to raise a family on a minimum wage. but we can't afford to pay more than that because our economy has been struggling. And there's things that the board can do to spur the economy on a little bit and get some money going. And that's a big part of my platform, is to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, and thank you, candidates, for those answers. And I want to thank the candidates, the audience, everyone here for joining us tonight. We would like to take the last 15 minutes of our program to have an opportunity for you to speak one-to-one with our candidates. And we would encourage you to vote on June 5th. If you're not registered to vote and are interested in registering, we do have a table out in the hallway with people ready to help to do that. Again, thanks for being here with us tonight. Have a great evening. Drive safe.